Radio TV phono nut here, and this is one of those deals where if you have something that you have a problem taking apart, you can't figure out how to disassemble it, then just box it up, send it via FedEx somewhere, and I guarantee you that by the time you get it back, FedEx will have figured out a way to disassemble your item in ways that you probably could never imagine. What we have here is a little Westinghouse mono record player from late 64, early 65. It is a one-tube wonder. But as I was getting around to saying, I bought this off of the Goodwill auction site. Now, this record changer, like most of them are in stereos and portable record players, is suspended on springs for shock mounting, vibration dampening, etc. It helps prevent the record from skipping, and it helps prevent feedback from the speaker from making its way back to through the cartridge. But anyway, I've gotten so that every time I buy a record player with a spring suspended changer, I ask the seller to back out the transit screws, because quite frankly, I'm getting tired of getting record players in where the changer has bounced from can to can during shipping, and 9 times out of 10 it punches a nasty hole through the lid of the record player, and in some cases it's even cracked the motor board. So I ask them to back the transit screws out and to secure the tone arm to its rest with tape, and then the package showed up. And I don't know how they managed to do this, but sellers seem to somehow find a box that's just the right size, the exact size of the item that they're shipping, and then they cram it in the box with no packing material. Well, I heard something rattling around in the box when I got it, and I knew it wasn't good. And when I opened the box, they had indeed backed out the transit screws and taped the tone arm like I asked. But let me show you what happened. Those apes at FedEx managed to bounce this around so hard that it broke the ends off of the transit screws where the turnbuckle thing flips under. And you can see this is one of the transit screws. It popped the ends off of both of them. I found one of the turnbuckles laying inside the box where it had fallen out. I have yet to find the other one, and it popped the end off of this bolt too. But if that's not bad enough, look at this. I also found these record changer parts in the bottom of the case, a spring and some plastic thing and an E-clip. Now, how FedEx managed to bounce this around so hard that it knocked an E-clip loose, I'll never know. I think that's something in the idler wheel assembly, because the idler wheel does not engage whenever I turn the changer on. I'll have to pull the platter and investigate that. Also, the 25 EH5 or whatever the output tube is had come loose from the socket and was rolling around in the bottom of the case. And when I put the tube back in the socket and turned the record player on, all I got was a bunch of popping and crackle from the speakers. So we're going to have to see what's up with that. But thank goodness I've got some spare BSR junk record changers that I can get parts off of if need be. Now, yes, this thing should have been packed better. It should not have been crammed in a box. It was just the same size as the record player. But these apes at these shipping carriers need to be more careful with stuff as well. I mean, that's the whole purpose of backing the transit screws out, is to keep the thing from getting damaged. And I don't think they were anticipating that it would get knocked around so hard that it would bust the tips off of the ends of the transit screws. But with that said, all the complaining in the world is not going to alter the fact that how brutal this stuff gets treated in shipping, and that means you're just going to have to pack anything you ship extra careful just to minimize the risk. Now had this been packed properly, would it have still gotten damaged? Maybe so, maybe not. Who knows? But it would have stood a better chance of surviving had it been packed a little better. Now I think the only thing that saved this from total destruction is this 45 adapter being placed on the spindle. Had it not been there, the way this changer was bouncing around, I would have received yet another one with a nice ugly hole punched through the lid of the record player. Alright, I'll now turn it on, show you what it does. Yeah, we hear popping and crackling in the speaker as soon as we turn it on, so it doesn't even have time for the tubes to warm up, so that sounds like something power supply related that's taking place there. Now the first thing we're going to do is replace the transit screws on the changer, and this old parts changer will be a good source for those. Alright, transit screws and turnbuckles replaced. They're backed out to the transit position, so this will be flush with the motor board and not float. That'll make it easier to service this. I'll worry about the changer parts that are in this little pill bottle here later, but right now let's see what's up with the amplifier. Alright, here's our amplifier exposed, little one tube wonder job, meaning it requires a 3-volt cartridge, a couple of paper capacitors, a selenium rectifier. And yeah, this was about one of the last tube ones I believe that they made. In fact, I know Westinghouse made a solid state version of this same record player, so this was definitely made during the 64-65. That was the transition era. Alright, I've got voltage coming off of the selenium rectifier. I've got voltage on the screen grid of the output tube. Let's look at the plate of the output tube. Okay, we have voltage on the output tube, and when it starts popping, the B plus is jumping around all over the place. So wiggle that tube in the socket. That may be what some of that static is. Alright, we got 92 volts on the plate. Rub the cartridge, the needle, nothing, no surprise there. Alright, I'm touching the center of the volume control and getting absolutely nothing. So we may have a dead cartridge, but I think we got a dead amp too. Alright, this thing's popping and carrying on. Our cathode voltage is only 1.4, so I think we probably got a bad output tube. Alright, I have the cartridge removed from the record player and connected to my AC voltmeter. And whenever I aggressively rub the stylus tip, it goes up to about, I can get it up to about 2.5 volts. This has a voltage rating of 4 volts. So it has some output, but it's not as hot as it should be. Now this is what's known as a TC8H full-fi cartridge. These are very hard to find. They're still in good condition, and when you do find them, they're expensive. In fact, the ones I'm seeing online are like, I'd spend over $60 on one with shipping, and that's from a company out of the UK. And then you have the typical ones on eBay that people want too much money for, and you can see the green corrosion on the cartridge pins and on around where the needle attaches. So yeah, why would I go for something like that? I swear people will try to sell anything. And it would also appear that we have a dead output tube. Now I might do a little work on this amp and we'll see what this cartridge will do, but that amp is probably going to get, well, let's just say you've heard of extreme home makeover. Well, what about extreme amplifier makeover? that amplifier is probably going to get hot rodded, and this record player is probably going to get a more modern ceramic cartridge that's stereo compatible, which this old BSR mono cartridge isn't stereo compatible. Now, a lot of people seem to think that all you have to do is put a 0.7mm stylus in an old mono cartridge and that'll make it stereo compatible, but that's false. The issue with these old cartridges is they do not have the vertical, as in up and down, compliance needed for stereo records. For stereo, you need horizontal and vertical compliance, and when you have insufficient vertical compliance, the groove tries to push the stylus in the upward position, but the stylus can't be pushed in the upward direction because the cartridge doesn't have the compliance to accommodate it, and that's how stereo grooves get wrecked. So on something like this, if you want to play a stereo record, you would either need to change the cartridge over to one that's stereo and wire the channels together, or you would have to replace the cartridge with a mono cartridge that is designed to be stereo compatible. But back when this record player was made, 64, 65, you could still buy mono as well as stereo albums for owners of older mono equipment. But that ended in 1968. 45s continued to be mono up into the 70s, although there were some stereo 45s in 58, 59, 60, but not very many were pressed, and the stereo format for 45s didn't really catch on. We didn't really start seeing stereo 45s again until about 68. But even from the 68 to 72 time frame, they were still fairly slow to catch on, and there were still a good many 45s being issued in mono up through about 72. But then there were still some labels, Bell, London, All Platinum. Those labels held out until 75 or 76 before they started releasing stereo singles. And I'm told the reason Bell did that is because if you wanted to hear the song in stereo, that was their way of forcing you to buy the LP. Now, for the most part, the only stereo 45s that I know of that Bell introduced were promo copies to radio stations. And on those, one side would be mono for AM and the other side would be stereo for FM play. But enough about records. We'll see what we can do with this record player to get it going and maybe get some sound out of it. I know our plate voltage seems to be a little low on the output tube. That could be because of the tube itself being defective. That could be a leaky filter cap, that could be a weak selenium rectifier, it could be any number of things. And we know the cap is dying because we could hear some 60 cycle hum in the speaker. I just tested this 25 EH5 and it is indeed dead. It's shorted. And one thing the Americans could have done that the Japanese did was use tube retainer clips to hold the tubes in the sockets. I mean, when these record players were new, they were transported by air or rail or truck or wherever to their final destination. And I just wonder how many of these had the tubes knocked out of the sockets whenever they were being transported. Now, had they used the clips like what the Japanese did, that might not have happened. But then again, I don't know. Given the way FedEx has a knack for destroying things, they could have probably managed to have gotten the tube out of the socket even with the clip. Well, no luck finding a 25 EH5. I found a 35 EH5, and yes, I know they both draw different amounts of current, but I just stuck it in there for a test just to see what would happen. And that cartridge does have some output. Alright, spinning this by hand. Tonal quality is pretty good, but I have to have the volume wide open. Now, overhauling this amp, putting the right tube in here would probably give us a little more volume, but I don't expect we would get full volume out of this. Alright, I have the filter capacitors replaced, and I had to do this a little bit unconventional. I normally would have used one terminal strip, but I had to really scrape the bottom of the barrel to find what I found, so this is how we did it. We used what's left of one terminal strip with 2 lugs on it, and then another 1 lug terminal strip for the ground, and that's just about the way it's going to have to be for right now. Well, that got us a little more volume, but it's still not nearly where it should be. Alright, plate voltage is up to about 107 volts versus what, 91 or 92, whatever it had with the old filter in it. And a similar schematic I looked at says about 110, so that's pretty close. Alright, this is all I'm going to do to the amp for now. These 2 paper capacitors are just line isolation capacitors. They won't have any effect on the performance. And there's a good chance this amplifier is going to be gutted, and there will be a hole drilled or punched right next to that output tube, and there will be something else like a 6AV6 put in there. And then of course I'll need to order a 25C5, so we'll have 25EH5, so we'll have the proper tube here, or I just might decide to go with a solid state FET circuit. I don't know. We'll determine that later. And I believe that spring and those other things go under here. Something to do with the idler mechanism. And I'm looking at this junk changer to see how that spring and everything is mounted. Well, I thought I had everything back on, but the wheel still won't engage, and this has no spring tension at all. And I'm sitting here calling Goodwill and FedEx some things off camera that are not very family friendly. As in, if y'all had any regard for other people's property, I might not have to be sitting here right now worrying about how to put this crap back together. Sitting here trying to get this clip off again so I can put the spring on correctly. I think I see what's wrong, and then the screwdriver slips and I stab my finger. The clip still won't come off. That's one of those situations where FedEx, those MFers at FedEx, can manage to get it off without any problem, but whenever I need it to come off, it won't come off. Alright, well, in the process of getting that clip off, the clip finally came off, and then the clip and the little plastic thing under it went flying. I'm not even going to attempt to try to locate that. So I just took the pieces off of the other changer, and as it turns out, there was a washer between the clip and the plastic thing that was missing. So I took it off the junk changer, and then still had no tension on the idler wheel, so I had to hold this spring and turn it around and wrap it, and now it fits under there tight, and I think now we have tension. So let's put it back together and see if we can somewhat play a record on this. Alright, it's running. Let's see if it has enough torque to get it through a change cycle. Alright, that's good. We don't want to let too much of that play, because we don't need any copyright BS. Alright, good. Now, I don't think the LP needle is in too good a shape on this, but we'll go get a junk 45 and see what it does. Alright, let's see if the reject works. Yep, so it does. Alright, we're on the LP side. Let's see if it'll... Yeah, it's kind of sluggish on the slow speeds. Well, it's tracking the record, but it doesn't sound that great. Alright, I took the platter off and cleaned the inner rim, the idler wheel, and the motor shaft with isopropyl alcohol. That wheel probably really needs to be taken out and put in a drill and given the sandpaper treatment, but I'm not doing that right now. Let's see if it does any better now. A little bit maybe. Alright, like I said, it plays, but that LP needle is worn out, and you know, I remember when I used to go to Radio Shack and buy a 2-pack of those little forked needles like what this cartridge uses for like 99 cents, and now they're about $8 to $10 a piece. Now I've got some of those here somewhere, I just need to find them, but this would preferably need a 1 mil mono stylus, since this cartridge is really not suitable for stereo records. And I had to jake leg one of the little pegs that holds the tone arm wire up in there fell out. Lord only knows where that is. So I just cut off a piece of a Q-tip, wrapped some masking tape up around it, and jammed it up in the hole there, and it seems to be working. Probably put a dab of glue in there to hold it in place, but right now it'll be okay. Now these BSR needles were color coded from what I've read. Red is a 1 mil mono, yellow was 0.7 mil stereo, and green is 78. So this is a red one, so it's a 1 mil mono. Now I don't believe anybody makes those anymore, but there are plenty of new old stock ones around.
You tender spring chicken. Girl, what's your name?
Isabella, but I can't talk to you right now. I'm on my way forward.
bother me. Beating on the ding dong don't bother me.
Okay, so just to recap what we've done to this, we basically resurrected this. We did not restore it. We replaced the filter capacitor. We replaced the dud 25 EH5 tube with a 35 EH5, and yes, I am well aware that is not a correct sub because they don't draw the same amount of heater current. So I will have to get a proper tube. I'll probably order 2 of them. That is, if they're reasonably enough priced when I'm ordering, just so I'll have another one for the next time. So we did that, and then we had to replace the busted transit screws and the turnbuckles, and then we had to replace we had to fix that spring and that little plastic piece that's the idler tensioner thing that somehow got knocked loose during FedEx treating it like a soccer ball. But right now it's working. The cartridge is actually working better than I anticipated based on what I was seeing on a AC voltmeter check. But I can tell you that cartridge is weak, but for the time being it will do. So we need to get a 25 EH5, we need to get a 1mm LP stylus, and then that will make things better. And then we need to overhaul the amp. Now, to make this an optimum record player, we would want to replace that cartridge with a modern stereo ceramic cartridge, and then add a preamp stage to that existing amplifier circuit. But as long as this cartridge that's in here is working as well as it is right now, I'm probably not going to worry about it. I'll just use this to play old beat up mono records and be done with it, because this is not something that you would want to use for your better copies of stuff. I mean, this thing, the recommended tracking pressure for that cartridge is like 10 to 12 grams, but I tend to think, just on me feeling the weight of the tone arm, it probably tracks a little heavier than that. Now, if we put a modern cartridge in there, we could get the tracking down to about 5 to 6 grams, which would be a lot better. But like I said, as long as what's in here is somewhat working correctly, we're going to leave it be. Alright, that's about all I've got for this right now. I hope you got something out of it, and more to come later. Well, I just now noticed this. Undoubtedly this happened in shipping, but you can see where the top is popped loose here. Most likely when that changer came loose and was knocking around against the lid, it just broke this loose. So we're going to have to ooze some wood glue under here and clamp this down, and then it should be okay after that. But want to be careful with that until we get that done. Oh, and a few more thoughts before we get out of here. I was looking at the specifications. A 35 EH5 will have a 35 volt 150 milliamp heater, and the 25 EH5 uses a 25 volt 300 milliampere heater. So we want to get that changed to the correct tube as soon as possible. And then of course you had the 50 EH5 and the 6 EH5 with different heater and current requirements. And then we have the older 25L6 octal tube, which I greatly prefer over the miniature tube here. And something else I need to expand on as far as the stereo mono thing. If we look at this Electra 45, it says stereo, also playable on mono phonographs. Now that can be a bit confusing, because most people would read that who don't know any better and think the record would be playable on whatever, but it's really not. That doesn't mean you can play it on your pre-stereo or non-compliant mono phonograph with a cartridge with no vertical compliance. What that means is you can play it on a mono phonograph that contains a stereo compatible cartridge. And I think that's probably how a lot of these records got wrecked. You know, kids often got the old hand-me-down mono hi-fi from mom and dad, or they had some cheap hand-me-down mono kitty record player from their older sibling, and then they played these stereo records on them, and it didn't take very long to wreck them. So keep that in mind as well. But anyway, I think I'm through now. One day we'll do a proper overhaul of this, but it's really not on my priority list at the moment. I'll probably get a 25 EH5 and go ahead and put that in there and maybe replace the needle, but that's about as far as it's going to go at the moment.